We're here today at the 2025 VRIC event, and we're joined today by Derrick Pattenden. He's the CIO of First Nations Royalty. He's also part of the Mohawks of Bay Quinte. Investment banking background. Great to have you with us today.
Happy to be here, Carlos. Enjoying the conference.
Of course, yeah. We'll start with, right away, a macro question. And we know that, in natural resources, a lot of those mines, a lot of those projects, they are located on Indigenous land. And in the past, there has been some conflicts and some issues where the Canadian government, has put policies in place to try and help the First Nations and have it a fair agreement. But there still has been times where the First Nations, they haven't benefited properly from the extraction of those natural resources like gold, silver, etc. What's the history behind that? Why did it happen? And how is it different today with the Canadian government?
Right. Well, one difference today is our companies are starting to understand those risks better and what's required to have a healthy relationship with their local Indigenous groups. Really a big part of that is informed consent and really just getting to know them at an earlier stage in the process and starting to build that relationship right from the beginning. And the history of it, thankfully it has been getting better for Indigenous groups, but a key part is coming up with more equitable structures and arrangements, because at a very high level, the history of at least on the financial payment side of things, if you go back far enough, there was none of those payments. And then Indigenous groups started getting fixed dollar payments from mining companies. So the mining companies say, hey, I'll give you, $3 million a year for each year this mine operates.
Right.
But that obviously has some pretty big problems, not very good impacts from inflation on that as the mines have longer mine lives. Then Indigenous groups started getting at least better deals, like bottom line payments, let's say, like linked to more percentage of profits at the mine. And only more recently now, we've started seeing some Indigenous groups getting a more equitable arrangement of net smelter returns or top line royalties on those mines. And that's really a truer, more fair and equitable sharing of the benefits of the mine, because if the miners start making more revenues, the Indigenous group does. And it works the other way too, where if the miner's making less revenues, they'll get paid less. It also allows them to start getting paid as soon as the mine enters production, which is really more fair in that they actually start taking on risks even before the mine's in production, right? So really, those early repayments are more equitable, and I think mining companies will have more success negotiating their impact and benefit agreements if they lean towards those sort of structures.
Right. So we're talking about mining companies. When you're building a mine and extracting resources from the ground, you don't do that as a company. You have a royalty. What's the difference between a royalty and a normal mining company?
Right. So, the big difference is the traditional, the mining companies, obviously they operate mines, and for that you need a lot of employees. Like every new mine you acquire, you're going to need hundreds of employees. Mining royalty company is a lot leaner than that, because we essentially receive royalty payments or checks from mines, so we're not involved in operating at all. A mining royalty company collects checks from mining companies, and really the whole business model is you have a portfolio of royalty payments that you're collecting, and the team's job is to go out and find new partnerships to keep adding to that portfolio, build up a bigger, more diversified royalty portfolio, which tends to be rewarded with higher valuations in the market as you go through and do that.
Right. So you're almost could you say you're almost like a small bank, and you're getting into projects, multiple projects, building a portfolio, and then getting a return on that later on when they get into production?
Yeah, it's similar to that. Exactly. The key is that you're not operating and you're just collecting checks. So really, the team's two main things is, as the checks come in, to check to make sure that check was paid the correct amount, and then beyond that, the team is focused on making new partnerships and acquiring new royalties.
What makes you one of a kind? Because Nations Royalty, there's no other royalty companies that are built that way. What makes you different than the other ones?
Yeah, we're definitely different. First of all, we're the largest majority Indigenous-owned public company in Canada. You could also say we're the smallest because we're the only one. It took till June 2024 was the first time where an Indigenous group, the Nisga'a Nation from Northern BC, our founding shareholder, they put some of their nation's assets inside a publicly traded company, which is now traded on the stock market.
Right.
So that's never been done
when
before.
It started with the Nisga'a Nation themselves. taking a leap really and making something different and getting listed publicly.
Definitely very visionary, right? To do anything for the first time is obviously a big step. And so they vended into our company 5 different royalty assets in exchange for shares of our company.
Okay.
And so they're currently a 77% shareholder, and that's what makes us the largest majority Indigenous-owned public company in Canada.
The Nisga'a Nation owns 77% of your company.
Yes.
What's the rest of the structure like for capital structure?
The rest of the structure, about 16% is the Fiore Group and management team.
Right.
So that's a very well-known mining company. It's founded by Frank Giustra, who's been a very successful mining entrepreneur among many other things. He was actually just recently inducted into the Mining Hall of Fame last week. Yeah. He was founded many different mining companies. The one most relevant to us would be he was the founder of Wheaton Precious Metals, which is the largest mining royalty company in the world. Yeah. So obviously, us being a mining royalty company, it's fantastic.
Yeah, if you walk around Vancouver, you see the Wheaton Precious Metals sign, right? Like outside, they still have their offices here.
Fantastic company, and them and Franco-Nevada were, they're the 2 biggest mining royalty companies, and they've both done a fantastic job building up really diversified quality portfolio, and that's why they have such big market caps, because they've both been extremely successful at doing that.
Totally. So how's it been having like someone like Frank Giustra by your side and part of this? It's probably been amazing. He's also the owner of a film company.
He founded Lionsgate Films, right?
Lionsgate Films,
which is like Blade Runner, Saw franchise. He's done a lot. Obviously, he's been a very successful businessman, and now I think he's mostly focused on philanthropy. But then he's got quite a few different mining companies out there today he's involved in. So he's obviously pretty bullish on the future of metals and mining.
Totally. So what's your background? We know we chatted and said you were an investment banker. How has that helped you in your position now, and what did you learn that you can translate to your position right now?
Right. So my background. So again, I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte First Nation. That's about 2 hours east of Toronto. That's a huge part of my passion for wanting to get involved in a company like this. My undergrad was in mining engineering, so I've got a good technical understanding of the mining side of things. And then I got my CFA, so a financial designation. And then I worked 15 years in mining investment banking. I was a director of a banking team at Canaccord. And over that 15 years, I was mostly focused on mergers and acquisitions, which is a bit atypical. A lot of bankers do predominantly financings. Probably over 90% of the revenues I worked on were mergers and acquisitions. So I was a financial advisor to mining companies to help them buy and sell mines and buy and sell other mining companies. I had some good luck over those 15 years. I was able to work on over $20 billion of transactions at a time, probably about 15 of that in the gold space. And then, so I first learned about Nations Royalty in the IPO press release in February. Right. And so when I'm sitting in my banking office, and when I saw this idea of a majority Indigenous owned and controlled mining royalty company being created, it was something I felt super passionate about. I wanted to be a part of it. Because it lends to my background quite a bit, because a mining royalty company is essentially continuous M&A, right? Because you're constantly looking for, in our instance, we're constantly looking for new partnerships with new Indigenous groups to do a predominantly share transaction. Could be some cash in that, but to be vending in all or a portion of some of their royalty payments into the company in exchange for shares. And I firmly believe that the Indigenous peoples of Canada have the power and ability to create a really strong mining royalty company, because they have access to some incredible assets, which is really probably the biggest challenge for the royalty space right now, is actually finding these quality assets and getting partnerships done on them.
So you almost get first dibs on good projects because you're part of this and you have the...
You could say that. It's been, let's just say, being the only majority Indigenous-owned mining royalty vehicle is very helpful for these partnerships, right? Because a lot of these communities, again, if you go back to that history, they had to fight really hard for a long period of time to finally start getting better deals. The appetite to have those assets go into non-Indigenous hands is not too strong, among some other things. But yeah, it's been very helpful, right? We're saying Indigenous groups, we should create an Indigenous alliance and create a really strong mining royalty company. That's what we believe.
100%. So what are the milestones that were hit during 2024? Obviously, it's a new company, and then I'd like you to go into what's going to happen in 2025, what the shareholders should look forward to as well.
Right. So 2024 is really just the founding of the company, right, in June. So we've been around for about 6 months now, and ever since that started, we spend most of our time now out talking to different Indigenous groups to explore new potential partnerships. And those things take time because these are obviously very big decisions for communities and nations, right? It's not an insignificant undertaking, and it's a lot to go through to explain the mining royalty business model, how it can help in your nation. So those things will take some time, but we're quite optimistic that in 2025 we'll finally have some of these talks we've been having for 6 months now with some of these groups and finally turn into a partnership, and that should help us even get more partnerships, right? Because as we get a bigger, more diversified portfolio and we start bringing on more and more Indigenous groups, it's a bit of an easier sell. For example, if I was saying, hey, do you want to be the 7th one to join as opposed to the 2nd?
Yeah.
But so very excited for 2025, and the partnerships would be the biggest catalyst our stock could have in 2025 is the announcement of a new partnership, and people can look for themselves at the quality of that asset and royalty.
Yeah. What are the main assets you have right now royalties on?
Sure. So again, there was 5 royalties vended into the company from the Nisga'a Nation. The first is one on Bruce Jack Gold Mine. It's a high-grade underground gold mine in northern BC, owned and operated by Newmont, a very large, well-known gold company. And to be clear, all of our assets are in northern BC at the moment because that's the Nisga'a Nation territory. So that's why they're all in northern BC, if people are just wondering the geography of these. The other 2 assets would be the Premier Mine and the Red Mountain Mine. That's owned and operated by Ascot Resources. Unfortunately, it had a rough 2024, and our share price took a hit from that as well because we had a royalty on them. But because they were targeting commercial production by the end of 2024, and they've had to push that back. They're behind on development. They had to restructure their debt, do equity financing. They just got a new management team in last week, so we'll be looking for them to update the market on what their new plans are for restarting that. Right. And then the other 2 assets are on projects. So one's on Kitsault, which is fairly rare in that it's like a pretty much a pure molybdenum deposit. It's privately owned by Resource Capital Funds. It's called New Moly.
It's private. It's a private deal.
It's private, yeah. It's privately owned by New Moly, which is I think 70-ish% owned by Resource Capital Funds. Okay. And then the other asset is on KSM. It's the bulk of the value in our portfolio at the moment, probably about 70% of the NAV of the company. It's on Seabridge Gold's KSM, which is the world's largest fully permitted but undeveloped gold copper deposit. It's obviously
the world's largest
fully permitted gold copper deposit. It's in northern BC. It's enormous. On reserves alone, it's got about 47 million ounces of gold, over 7 billion pounds of copper, and off their pre-feasibility study, for 7 years they're supposed to produce about 1.4 million ounces of gold a year, right? Which is, to put that into context, the largest operating gold mine in Canada today is Detour, makes about 700,000. So it's about double the size of the world's largest operating gold mine in Canada today.
That's huge. And what's the timeline for this project? Do you know around when they should start producing?
Yeah, so I mean the good news is obviously it's absolutely enormous. What the challenge that comes with that is the very big capital cost to build it, right? You're not going to build the world's largest for cheap, let's say. Right. So really the next catalyst there would be Seabridge Gold. They're looking for joint venture partners on that asset. So either a joint venture being announced by them would be very helpful to get better clarity on production for that, or an outright takeout of one of the large mining companies acquiring Seabridge Gold. So and I will say in 2024, a big thing for them is they got their substantially start designation, which essentially was a designation which means you've spent close to $1 billion on this thing so far. That's enough where your permits are now in place for the life of mine. So that was a nice change, which wasn't there before, which kind of allows different mining companies to now sharpen their pencil on considering partnering with it now that they know the permits are in place.
Yeah, and permits have been an issue for mining companies. It's been really long to get things going. Why is that? Like obviously the Canadian government has something to do with that. What needs to be done? Are they do you think it's gonna happen that it's gonna take a shorter amount of time in the future, depending on who gets elected?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I kind of try to. I stay out of that politics, right? I'm not going to say of advice I can give to the politicians on how to improve that. It's kind of a mixture of, in some cases, some of those policies are pretty tough, but in other cases too, it's also a good and better mining company does a better job navigating through those things
and getting quicker.
Like, because sometimes a classic example will be a mining company might be going through their permitting process and the last second find out, oh, you got to do a study on this thing, and maybe that study takes 8 months, right? And so that kind of pushes your timeline back 8 months. Whereas, another company that could have kind of anticipated that might have already done that sort of study before it was clear that they needed it, and then now when that ask comes, they can get it done more quickly. So
you're saying it's like easy to blame external factors for your permitting taking long, but sometimes it's an internal issue and you just took long.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a mixture, and obviously the details matter on every one of those. It's going to be different in every case, but it's a mixture, and I've not been involved in the permitting process on the mining side, so I can't speak too great about that. But I have heard plenty of examples of how a company that had their ducks in a row and kind of was ready in advance for what they would probably need, that helps them on the permitting timeline. But permitting stuff, for sure.
Yeah, it is 100%. So is there anything else you'd like to tell any potential shareholders? Why should the investors look into this, small cap Canadian stock right now?
Well, maybe I'll cover two things. So one is, what is the benefit to Indigenous groups that partner with us? Yeah. Really, there's three primary benefits. So one is asset diversification. So some of these groups, they have a huge part of their nation's net worth tied to payments out of a single mine, right? And so if that mine were to fail, let's say,
there's more risk.
They're a very concentrated portfolio, you'll say, right? So if they partner with us on all or a portion of those payments, they can essentially trade the value at that one mine for an interest in our company, which then owns a portion of those payments, but also other payments as well. So it allows them to diversify future revenues, which up to this point, they haven't really had the ability to do that. They've had kind of no choice in some instances to keep a large part of their nation's net worth on a single mine, right? So one's diversification. Two is bring value forward. So again, some of these groups, there's a very substantial amount of payments coming their way over the next 30 years. Right. But there might be projects and things they want to do with their community right now. So if you would partner with us, again, on a portion of those payments, we'd be looking for a partnership based on the present value of all those payments. And it's certainly going to dwarf the size of your single annual payment. So this, a partnership with us through cash and shares can really help accelerate things. And then lastly, and this is kind of for Indigenous groups, but also for the investors, is they can really unlock the higher value of what their royalties are really worth. Because as you pool royalties together, they become worth a lot more. Like if you had a royalty and I had a royalty, rather than us each sitting there collecting checks on it, I would say we'd be further ahead if say we put these royalties together and had a two royalty company that we each own half of. Right. You're further ahead owning half of two than you are owning just one yourself. And that's really the whole reason why the royalty model exists. And then for investors, it's really, again, there's probably 20 plus mining royalty companies out there today. Yeah. The difference with us is we're going after a very different opportunity set, right? So we're an Indigenous-owned, Indigenous-controlled, Indigenous-governed company, right? We have majority Indigenous management team, majority Indigenous board of directors, and majority Indigenous shareholder base. That's for a very good reason. It's because we're in the business of Indigenous royalties, and we just see that the untapped opportunity set of that space has some very high quality royalties. So we think that's something that should attract investors. Is look at what sort of portfolio Indigenous peoples of Canada have the ability to create, and then we got to execute on that in 2025 and help shine the light on what sort of assets are out there, and then you'll be able to compare for yourself, the assets we partner on and how that stacks up against the next marginal asset being acquired by the rest of the competition, let's say.
Great. All right. Well, if anyone wants to stay updated, ticker NRC on the TSX and NRYCF on the OTC if you're in the US. And we'll also throw their website below. And any questions, I'm sure IR or you or
reach
whoever,
out to us. We'd be happy to talk about nation's royalty for sure.
Great. All right. Thanks for the interview.
All right. Thanks, Carlos.